In today's video, I tackle one of the absolute most polarizing questions you could ask yourself in the current market. Are you really missing out if you do not buy a home right now? In the next few minutes, we're gonna answer exactly that.
Real quick, for those that don't know me, I'm Adam Hancock. I have a real estate group in Southwest Florida, and I put out daily videos on Florida relocation and investment assistance.
Okay, the time of such uncertainty, especially in the Florida real estate market, new builders on wait list, resales at inflated cost, one of the absolute most important questions people have been asking is, am I really missing out by not buying a home now? Can I wait? Over the next few minutes, I'm gonna do my absolute best to answer this question. I've structured this over 3 main areas that with the eventual goal of giving you, for your situation, the exact break-even point of, do you need to buy now or can you wait? Okay, the first area we really need to discuss is opportunity cost. In my mind, this has 2 main facets that we need to hash out. The first one being appreciation. Now, my view of appreciation is relatively simplistic, but it's simply the increase in value over a period of time versus just the divide in what I owe versus what it's worth. Say that Tommy buys a house at $500K. Whether he has let's say he has a mortgage on it. Say that he has it for 2 years on a mortgage, and say that it's worth, or that he owes $475,000 by the time he goes to sell it, right? Then he goes to sell it and say that it's worth $535,000. Current market would be worth $1 trillion, but say it's just that. So the appreciation is this part right here, just the increase in value. Now what Tommy actually nets is from here to here minus fees. So he's gonna walk away with more liquidity, but the appreciation portion just exists here, right? So you can walk away with cash. That's the whole rent versus buy scenario, but the appreciation gives you a double whammy of value. So that's kind of that in a nutshell. Okay, so now that we've kind of built a foundation for appreciation as a whole, what we have yet to do is define why that matters relating to the urgency of purchasing now versus waiting. So say that I'm buying a house that is, say, a base price of $700,000. Say I'm building this house. The lot is $98,000, right? So I'm almost at $800K. I'm gonna layer on some, this is 2,500 square feet, and I'm gonna layer on this kind of stuff. I'm at the last phase of a neighborhood. Say my landed cost is in the 900s. So that scenario though is houses that did not sell at that 2 years ago, right? If I buy that house now, is that house going to be worth $1 million? Say I end up at 950. Is that house going to be worth $1 million even 3 years from now, right? So what I'm getting at here is, could you have replicated that later? So what is your urgency placed on? Especially if you're cash and you're not relating to interest rates. So now this might not be the new house in that neighborhood, it might be resale or whatever, but how high are these things going to go? So that's the perfect example of at least maybe pressing pause on urgency to at least reevaluating if that's your scenario. Say scenario B is I'm buying a $485,000 house on phase 1 of the neighborhood that eventually is going to be where we are at 3 years from now. As far as like that $485,000 house might be able to sell $650 like 12 months later, 15 months later. That's happening all over the place. Just saw one that went from $1 million to 1.2 and it closed in January, but they started that build in the previous January. But scenario 2, there might be some urgency layered related to appreciation as a whole. If appreciation is not a value, you do not need to get to an area in a given amount of time, this would be your kind of yin and yang of, do I need to do it now if it's not the perfect scenario for us? Okay, so beyond appreciation, what's really interesting to me here is point number 2, which is what else am I paying elsewhere, right? So take that first scenario, 950K, I'm not making money, there's no urgency I need to place in this scenario, but what if I'm sitting in New York and I'm looking to move to Miami or West Palm Beach or Sarasota over here, Pensacola, Destin, wherever, right? What if I'm sitting in New York or Canada or California, Europe, and that 2 years of waiting, I'm just paying all this extra money. My taxes are $20,000, the total ownership cost is more expensive, right? So now appreciation, not making money in Florida, still might make sense. So that's something to really consider. So I think you gotta look at both. And there's a lot of scenarios where it could be right or wrong, but with all the information, it's not whether I think it's right or wrong. It's so personal. It's your cash, mortgage, do interest rates, are they relevant, all this kind of stuff. So I want to get that second point across, and now let's move on to area number 2. Okay, our second main area we really need to discuss is really at a macro level, and this is simply, are you being priced out or can you replicate later? This to me has 2 main facets as well. The first one at a neighborhood level. So at a neighborhood level, kind of parking the city as a whole for the moment. For example, if you have a builder you like and you're doing new construction, or an area you like with your specific criteria, typically there's a few different options available to you to kind of do that the best way. So then what happens if at that specific level, that scenario no longer works? Like you thought you're gonna be able to do it for $750K and now it costs $900, whatever disqualified you, right? Or it crept into a school zone you don't wanna be in or something like that, then typically your list would get pretty narrow and would become way heavier, one, focused to resale, but also just in general may get tricky. And if that whole scenario pushes you actually out of the area you wanna live in, that could become a definite problem. That's happening all over the place, especially at specific price ranges in areas. So that's something to really consider at the neighborhood level. And a lot of times there's very similar ways to replicate that in other parts of counties and cities specifically. But again, if you're really honed in on an area, this may become problematic. Okay, now parking the neighborhood side and going more macro, let's talk city or county as a whole. So what happens when you are honed in on like West Palm Beach, or you're honed in on North Fort Myers or something like this, or like Lee County, or you want a specific area of the state of Florida to meet your needs and your wants and all that kind of stuff. What happens if now all the ways that you kind of thought were attractive, you're either priced out, or you're priced out of where you want to be, not just what you can afford, or some scenario doesn't work, right? Then what happens if the city gets disqualified? Then it becomes even a bigger issue of qualifying. Where else would we want to be? Do we even want to move to Florida now? That kind of thing. And I think there's ways to kind of say like for instance, like a great example is like Lakewood Ranch versus Wesley Chapel. There's ways of doing like similar versions that may be more attractive of an area of a city, right? Like the suburbs to a certain city. So there would be like, how many different ways could you replicate that across Florida as a whole? But again, typically people aren't usually saying like equally, I love Sarasota versus downtown Tampa, or I love Naples versus Pensacola, right? So it would be kind of a hard pill to swallow at that point, but that's becoming very real as well. People are just basically like, everything I thought about retirement, everything I thought about relocating early, everything I thought about this whole scenario, right? If your world gets turned upside down in that facet, that becomes a big issue, right? So anyway, I just wanted to kind of get that point across. I thought it's pretty relevant to the current market, and let's hop to our third area for this video. Okay, and the third and final issue that we need to discuss related to this very important topic of are you missing out if you do not purchase a home now is interest rates and higher home prices. So to me, this always exists in kind of a triangle. So you have your down payment here, and then you have your interest rates and your higher home prices here related to total monthly payment. Now, the good thing with lower interest rates are they typically give you more purchase power, but what happens here in the bummer is that it spurs higher demand, so which creates a seller's market, which then creates higher purchase prices. So with all of that in play, lower interest rates, higher purchase prices, how do you decide if you should do something now in this unprecedented time of low interest rates, or if it's at 3.5% or 4% in 24 months from now, how much impact is that going to have on you based on how much you're putting down in your type of mortgage? So that's what we're going to discuss here in the next couple seconds. Okay, so I think it would be best to do an illustration to narrate this point. So we're gonna use a guy named Frank. Say Frank wants to buy a house right now at $450,000. Say Frank is gonna put down 20% because he doesn't wanna pay mortgage insurance, which is $90,000 of cash, not including your closing cost, right? That might be a couple points in addition to that, depending on what you're buying. Say he's gonna do a 30-year loan, and then say he's got a 750 credit score, and we're gonna talk about mortgages here because this is gonna be affected by interest rate more, but say he's just over 3% in interest. This puts Frank with a payment just under $2,000. So what people are along the lines of current thought, what people are saying is, do I have more purchasing power now because the interest rates are lower than they've ever been? So say Frank takes that conversation and he goes to 500K. So say Frank is still putting down that same 20%. And what that does a couple things, right? Same interest rate. So then it just goes just over 2,000. You got a couple $100s in play there. A lot of folks have a lot more affordability to pay a monthly payment increase versus liquidity. So what that does to down payment might be your biggest effect. Now, granted, you had $90,000 in the bank, but you might have considered the other 10 or whatever it may be for closing costs, right? So you got to affect, if you're going to jump in purchase price, even if you have more purchasing power, it may affect the down payment and liquidity, maybe not something you're comfortable with. So this area right here, you need to really consider. So now let's talk about everybody's fear, right? So what everybody's fear is that interest rates increase, but you're not going to back in the day, interest rate might have gone up, but you might have saved money on the house later in these inflated markets. Well, I think a lot of people would say now interest rates are going to go up and so are home prices, right? So let's take the first pricing scenario of $450,000, which was at $1,889 a month. So if you're at 450K, just real quick here, 450K at 20% down, which is again our 90,000, so liquidity would stay the same, but say our interest rate goes to 4. So now that same house now cost almost as much as the $500,000 price with the lower interest rate. So this is exactly what everybody would deem as purchasing power, saying that if there's urgency related to anything in this current market, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with that, is that if home prices aren't going to go down, interest rates would really, really matter. And I know that it's talked about like you should just buy no matter what because of interest rates. I don't know if I believe that, but if you're taking a 3 to 4%, if it would make a jump that high, then that would say that right now, if you think your cap is 450K, then I would say maybe consider going earlier, especially at this price range, right? Because you're getting priced out of a lot of markets. Maybe go earlier, go 500K, see where you can stretch it there, because you always have the opportunity to refinance later. Okay, so the one thing to think about though is that I'm kind of the opinion, now this is gonna vary widely, and I'm not an economist, but I think the potential that the interest rates goes from 3 to 3.4, 3.5 over the next 24 months is more realistic. Now we don't know, right? But now you're talking about a lot more negligible price increase. So again, this whole thing works around the urgency of do you need to, and I'm not saying it's fake urgency, but do you need to place urgency on this thing if you're gonna lose out by 50K? I think it's more like, are you gonna be priced out by that price range? So again, I just wanna show you that quick example. Now I do have I have made an Excel file that is a tool. If that's of interest to you and you wanted to play with this interest rate scenario and toggle, then please email me at info@experiencesrq.com. Would love to send that to you. But that's kind of my piece there, right? So then the last thing I would say is interest rates. Let's talk builder incentives, cash, and interest rates from a new construction standpoint, just to finish this thought off. So let's say that a lot of people say, should I use the new construction lender if I'm not getting as good of an interest rate? So let's talk about like that monthly payment scenario. So say that you're building a house that costs, I don't know, $650,000. And say that the people are saying that if you use our lender, we'll give you $7,000. And you're like, well, my lender's a half a point less. And say you're talking this scenario, that my lender's at 2.9 versus 3.4, whatever it is. So think about the $7,000, how many months it would take for you to earn that back in what the interest rate savings would be, right? Okay, so my camera died. We had to improvise with the phone real quick. But the last point before I end number 3 is that just interest rates in my mind will not always kill you. It's just not unanimously across the board. I need to buy when I'm not ready or all this kind of stuff, right? Because from 3% to 3.4%, I think, again, I'm just never a proponent of just like bum rushing just because you feel like you can never replicate. So I think you have to be cognizant, right? There's missed opportunities all the time because people have too much bravado. But also it's not why I would do something before I'm ready. So that's my piece there. And then with new construction as a whole, also consider if someone's giving you money to use their lender, and then you're like, hey, I was getting a 2.9% with my own lender, and they're at a 3.4%, right? But they're giving you $7,000 of cash. Think about how many months, you don't have to think about it, you can map out how many months it would take to recoup your $7,000 they gave you in just interest rate savings, right? So, and a lot of times it would take forever. So just think about that. I mean, you just can't say like half a point all of a sudden just dominates you from a pricing standpoint. Okay, so that's our third and final point on purchase price and interest rates on should I buy now or should I wait? And that does it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure you subscribe. Please leave your questions in the comments below. We're going to answer those live on video. Please reach out to us if you need anything at all in the future. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.